All right, I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I'm going to spend some time in verses 22 to 24. There are a number of little items here to go through. The first thing that I want you to notice is that Paul, again, he speaks of the three different groups of people. You have the Jews, the Gentiles, and you have us, the children of God, those who are living by the new covenant. Beginning in verse 22, he says, "For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God." So he's got all three people here. We've got the Jews, the Greeks, and us. Okay, from verse 22 and 23. Let me speak about the Jews requesting a sign first. What the idea of a sign. Why is it that they need a sign? Is generally because, as I explained in the previous message, the relationship that existed between the Jews and God was a relationship that looked a lot like a relationship of conflict that would only continue as long as everyone has a well-defined, voluntary, willful behavior. What is going to be the willful, voluntary behavior? And so the idea was that, well, if the Jews are confronted with a decision of what they may do or what they may not do, if they're confronted with a decision, if they do something, then what will God do in response? In what way will he participate? This was normally seen in history as in the context of a decision for war. That's usually where this showed up, that the Jews were confronted with a decision. Do they go to war? Do they not go to war? And so the sign was mainly about, should we go to war because we want to know, are you going to go with us? Or are you not going to go with us? Or maybe you're going to join our enemies. What will your decision be if we decide to do this? That was the fundamental idea related to a sign. It was a way of saying, we have to make a decision here. So God, what will you do if we make a decision this way or that way? To the Greek, that just wouldn't make any sense. It makes no sense to be asking a God for some kind of a sign so that we make a decision. The reason why is because according to Greek philosophy, God has already made all of the decisions. There aren't any more decisions to be made. His plan has already been defined. The will of God is about what it is that he has decided is going to take place, and we're just kind of watching everything unfold. And so the idea of a sign doesn't fit. We don't make decisions. We don't make choices. We just discover what the plan of God is for our life. Okay, that is pagan Greek philosophy. For the Jew, that just doesn't make any sense at all, because the entire definition of a Jew was established by the Mosaic Law, and this included decisions and choices. What are you going to do and what is God going to do? And so the idea of the Greeks seeking after wisdom and not a sign, they're seeking after something else, the sign would make no sense to the Greek, and the theology of the Greek would make no sense to the Jew, because it just doesn't fit in to the definition of a Jew and the relationship that God established through the Mosaic Law. Okay, so the Greeks are seeking after wisdom. I'll come back to that in just a moment. But the Jews, they don't really need to seek after wisdom. They don't need wisdom. Okay, now, of course, they can benefit from wisdom, and there's a lot of wisdom that you can find in the scriptures. It's not like there's the complete absence of it. But in comparison with the Gentiles, they don't really need that kind of wisdom or that magnitude of wisdom because they have the law. All right, and the law will tell them what to do and what not to do for the most part. And so the law provides them with all the wisdom they need. That's the perspective that they would have, and why they simply would not be able to relate to the Greeks in this way. Okay, so now the Greeks are seeking after wisdom, right? They're looking for wisdom. What is this going to mean? Why are they looking for wisdom? They're looking for understanding. Okay, they are after some sense of understanding, but regardless of whether they understand or they don't understand, the plan of God is still going to unfold. So there's not a lot of incentive beyond the fact that they may be able to assert some special awareness of what God or the gods are doing in their lives. Okay, the Greeks, they definitely do not need signs at all, because God has already made the decisions. He's already established the plan, and so those things just don't have a place within Greek philosophy. Now you'll find today, of course, because Christianity does conform a lot to pagan Greek philosophy. In other words, a lot of what people believe is Christianity is really pagan Greek philosophy and is not Christianity at all. But that's one of the reasons why people will identify more with the idea of God's plan for your life or providence. We don't want to use the word destiny because the world likes to use that one. But people effectively live by that anyway, and it corresponds better with the Greeks. And they don't identify so much with the Jews. So by default, a lot of Christians are after wisdom. By default, it's just part of the thing. We can find the principles for daily living instead of living through a personal interactive relationship with God, that He guides us and leads us personally on a daily basis. That's a whole different way of life. Okay, so in verse 22, speaks of the Jews and the Greeks. For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. Okay? Christ crucified. This is something completely different from the way of the Jews and the way of the Gentiles. It's completely different from both of those. Both the Jews and the Gentiles, or the Jews and the Greeks, are going to be struggling with the implications of Christ being crucified. In verse 23, but we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. All right, now let me start with the Greeks and why it would be foolishness, why the cross is foolishness to the Greeks. Okay, what the cross represents, or the crucifixion represents, is it represents a decision that God makes, and it represents decisions that we make. Okay, through the cross, God has offered a new kind of relationship. And people have to respond. They have to choose. They have to decide to surrender to the new covenant that God is offering. This doesn't work in Greek philosophy. All right? There is no decision to be made in Greek philosophy. In Greek philosophy, you are either one of those who are going to heaven, or you are one of those who are going to hell. And, God is the one who decides that, not you. He is the one who creates some people to go to heaven and other people to go to hell. There is no decision for you or I to make. All right? That has no relevance. And so the crucifixion doesn't have any relevance. It doesn't have any meaning because it introduces the opportunity to decide if you're going to embrace the forgiveness of sins or not, if you're going to receive the Holy Spirit of God or not. That's a decision that we make in response to what he did. But in Greek philosophy, we don't respond to God. All right? You don't respond to God in Greek philosophy because he's the one who has established all the plans already. He's the one who has made all the decisions already. There are no choices for us to make. We're either, one of his children or we're not one of his children. And you should recognize that the way that I've said this is consistent with what a lot of people believe in the churches that you are surrounded by, but that's what it's more compatible with. To the Greeks, the crucifixion doesn't make any sense. Now you'll find that of those who are more devoted to that kind of a belief, you'll find that the crucifixion doesn't mean a whole lot to them either. The complete forgiveness of sins doesn't have really that much relevance, because they're one of the chosen of God, for example. So it doesn't really have much relevance. They may try to make it sound like it does, but in effect, it really doesn't. And to be loved by God and accepted by God means something completely different to them than it would mean to you or I if we are resting in the forgiveness of sins such that God has provided us with a new way of life entirely, to live by the inheritance that he has received in a responsive, participatory relationship with a person. Okay, such that we make decisions and God makes decisions. We make choices, he makes choices. All right, that's completely separated from pagan Greek philosophy. And because a lot of Christianity really is just a Christianized version of pagan Greek philosophy, that's what they fundamentally believe also. Okay, so for the Gentile, Christ crucified is foolishness. It just doesn't have a place. It doesn't fit within pagan Greek philosophy. It just doesn't really have a place there. Okay, from the point of view of the Jews, that Christ crucified is a stumbling block to the Jews. It's a stumbling block to the Jews mainly because it fulfills the demands of the law. Right? That's why it is a fundamental stumbling block. It will take the law away from the Jew. And if the law is taken away from the Jew, then what is the definition of a Jew? And of course, that's part of the point, that a Jew has to be converted to become a child of God through the new covenant, just as a Gentile needs to be converted to become a child of God according to the new covenant. They are to become a new person. They are to let go of the old person and embrace the new person who God turns them into through resurrection, all right, through a new creation in Christ Jesus. And so the separation from the law is a separation from the entire definition of a Jew. Okay, the crucifixion also establishes a relationship that we don't live by signs. Okay, just like with the Gentiles, we don't live by wisdom. Okay, or the pursuit of wisdom, as the Gentiles, as the Greeks would pursue wisdom. We don't do that. From our point of view, our wisdom comes from the person of God. We just ask him, God, what do you think? Okay, the Greeks don't do that. They reason, they argue, they debate, they try to derive what the conclusions should be based on the fundamental axioms and theorems and principles that we already have established as being the foundation of truth, right? That's what they're doing. But for us, we have a person who's involved who can just say, you know what, this is what I think. And there it is. There's the wisdom. All right? This is a stumbling block to the Greek because it doesn't conform to their model of deriving wisdom. Instead of it coming from the person who defines what all wisdom is, we have to derive it. We have to figure it out. Well, I don't have to figure out the wisdom of God. I just ask. Okay? He just tells me when I need it. I need some wisdom here. What do you got? And sometimes he shares things with me. Other times I remember what he shared before. We also don't have a need for signs, okay, as the Jews have a need for signs. Not because we don't make decisions, but because we already have the person. All right? The Jews are requesting a sign so that they may know what God is going to do in response to what they are going to do. I don't concern myself so much with what God is going to do with what I'm going to do. I mean, when I decide to go do something, that if it's my own decision, then what that is that's a decision to bring God along with me, because he lives within me. He is already with me. And so if I decide that I'm going to engage the world in a certain way, I'm going to bring God with me into that situation. And you know what? He might do something. He might not do anything. But it just doesn't matter. If that's what I want to do, I'm going to go do it. And so I don't need a sign. If the Lord sends me to go and do something, I don't need a sign for him to do that. He can just put it on my heart and say, you know what? I need you to go do something. Would you go do something for me? That's what he has done with me in the past. I would expect him to do that again in the future. He doesn't need to give me some special sign. Just tell me. Just tell me. You don't have to give some special sign in the stars in the sky. I mean, those things are fine, but with me and God, the signs just don't mean anything. Okay? I don't need those. Don't talk to me that way. Be direct. God, if you got something to say, just say it. Okay? If you're going to do something, just do it. All right? That's how I perceive the idea of the signs of the Jews and the wisdom of the Greeks. Okay? Just as they would have a problem with my point of view, so also I have a problem with their point of view. It just doesn't fit. It doesn't make any sense. All right, let me proceed into verse 24, right? From verse 23, but we preach Christ crucified, to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called, again referring to us, both Jews and Greeks, because the Jews and the Greeks become new covenant believers, right? Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. All right? The person of our God, represented as Christ, is the power of God and the wisdom of God. Now, when he refers to Christ, he's referring to the Messiah. He's referring to Jesus. Okay? We should pay attention to his ministry, in addition to other things as well. But mainly, I believe he's wanting to place more focus on the ministry of Christ, such as, with man it is impossible to obey the law to the satisfaction of God. With men this is impossible. With regards to the Sermon on the Mount, you are to be as perfect as God. Okay, this is the foundation for the recognition that we have a need for the divine forgiveness of God through the cross. Okay? So when we look at, sorry, I lost my place. When we look at verse 24 with regards to the wisdom of God and the power of God, Christ, the power of God, then we can identify with the wisdom and the power through the wisdom of the truth that God has revealed through Christ. That's an example of the purpose of the law, and the power that is there such as making a new creation entirely, resolving the sin issue of humanity, changing and transforming a person into someone else through the relationship with God. Okay, that's power. That's a power of God that no one else would see. All right, and again, the Jew has to be converted to be a child of God, just as a Gentile needs to be converted to become a child of God. That's why he says that both are called. This is where the children of God come from. They come from either the Jews or the Gentiles. In this case, he refers to the Greeks. All right, now being called, what does it mean to be called? This is an important issue. From the Jews' point of view, there really isn't a place to be called unless you're called by God to have a certain role in the collective, usually as a prophet or a king, something related to that. But an individual task is just not really the predominant view, that's presented there. To be called from the perspective of the Greek, from the perspective of the Gentile, it just doesn't fit on an individual basis, because we're not really called by God, because he's already decided what's going to happen and what isn't going to happen. And so there really isn't much of a place for being called. Okay, now let me address what people are usually thinking about when it comes to being called first. All right, and I'm going to address this to say that I don't agree with this view, but the most common view within Christianity of what it means to be called by God is people are usually looking for needs, okay, where there may be a need for something or for someone. All right, and that's usually where people will start. They start with, well, are there any needs? And if there are needs, well, are there any needs that I personally feel I would like to fulfill? All right. And if there are, then they call that being called by God to go and meet these needs. All right. I see it in the exact opposite way. I don't think that God defines the calling by the needs. I believe that he sends us to meet certain needs, whether we understand what those needs are or we don't even understand what those needs are. He sends us to meet those needs. The need is not the call itself. It is God who sends us to meet those needs. Okay? Now, people will say, well, Aaron, I kind of agree with you in that sense that God sends us to meet the needs, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that we are first called to God. That's who we are called to. That's the call. The call of God is come unto me. It's not, there are needs, go to them. All right? You may go. Maybe he'll go with you. Maybe he won't. I mean, he will if he dwells within you. Maybe he'll participate in what you're doing. Maybe he won't. And it's okay either way, right? But the need itself, just because needs exist, doesn't mean that you're automatically called. You are to be called to your God. And then he will send you to meet certain needs. Or he won't. Okay? Now, if you go, then you've just been sent, right? And if you've been sent, then you're put, okay? And if you know who sent you and you know who put you, then it doesn't matter what the outcome may be, whether the needs are met or they're not met, or whether you starve and die, whatever, or you're murdered, whatever the conclusion is, it doesn't matter if needs are met or not met. What matters is that we are called to him and he sends us. And if we are sent, then we are put. And if we know who sent us and we know who put us, then the outcome is of no relevance. what is of relevance is that we have this personal relationship with God where he does ask us to participate in something that he is doing, and we just decide to do that. And if you don't, he'll send somebody else. There have been a few occasions where God has asked me to do certain things, and I knew that if I didn't do it, he's going to pick somebody else to go do it. So, how am I going to feel about that when he finds somebody else and they go do something that he asked me to do first? This is something that's come to mind on occasion. And sometimes it keeps me going with some things that he has me participating in, knowing that this is something I'm doing with him, and if I don't do it with him, he's going to ask somebody else to do it, and I'd kind of rather be the one, all right, and that's a real part of life. So those who are called are first called to Christ. Okay, now who is going to be called? With the Jew, there's no calling because you're either a Jew or you're not. All right. But with the Greek, the calling can mean something. All right. Either you are the called of God because God has already made that decision or not. But in this case, I'm saying that it's a decision that we are to make. There's a difference there. All right. That the call that God makes is not to some people. All right. With the Greek, they would have to say that the call is to some people, because obviously some people seem to be close to God and other people reject God. Those who reject God probably haven't been called by him. That's the pagan Greek philosophy point of view. But I'm saying that God calls out to everyone. All right. The entire world. Okay, everyone who gets born into this world at some point in their life, they are going to be called by God. And the call is to come unto me. And how many people could respond to that call? 100% could respond to that call. You'll notice that definitely not 100% of people respond to that call. That means that those who do not respond to the call have decided for themselves that they do not want to respond to that call of come unto me. Okay, that's it. So those who are called, well, really everybody is called, but there are a lot of people who reject the call. All right, now this could be defined a little bit more to say that what God is looking for, who he is calling out to, does distinguish between those who will come to him and those who won't. It depends on the nature of the call. Come unto me, but there's a little bit more to come unto me. All right, you need to. Is there anyone out there? This is an example of how the call could be represented. Is there anyone out there who wants to know who God is? Okay, that's an example of calling someone to him. Is there anyone out there who wants to know him? And you will find that, okay, some people will say, yeah, I'd like to know him. Other people would say, no, I don't want to know him. I'm busy. I got other things to do in my life. I got some opinions about God, and I don't like the way that he's set things up here. I don't like the way that he's allowing things to happen that I don't like. And so, no, I don't want to know who he is. He can just stay away and come back and ask me again when he fixes all of this stuff that's going on in the world. That's what people do. So it's more specific when you think about, well, what will the call really be? It's a call unto him personally. Is there anyone out there who wants to know who he is? Okay, is there anyone out there who wants to be a part of what he's doing? Okay, this is the nature of the call that he presents when he presents the gospel. With the gospel, is there anyone out there who realizes that there's something wrong with them? That they have a need for forgiveness? It's hard to find people like that. He calls out to everyone with that offer, He'll provide forgiveness, but not everyone is going to respond to that. A lot of people are going to say, I don't need to be forgiven. That's fine. I'm good. What about those who want to be resurrected, by the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit? Is there anyone like that? That's how God distinguishes between the lost and the saved. Okay, it is through the nature of the call that is offered to everyone. Some people will respond, other people will reject. But it still is an individual decision that each person makes. Okay, let me review this again. From verse 22, for Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom. Again, we have no need for signs, and we have no need for wisdom in the context of the Greeks. We have the person of our God. But we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, because it'll take away what's important to them. And to the Greeks foolishness, because it doesn't make any sense for us to have decision-making capacity or choices or free will. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness, but to those who are called, all right, which is, the call is, come unto me. Do you want to know him? Do you want to be a part of his life? All right, that kind of a person. And these people come from either the Jews or the Greeks, one or the other, or the Gentiles. Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. It is the person who is the wisdom of God. It is the person who is the power, right? Like I said, with regards to wisdom, I don't need to go looking for wisdom. I got a person who I can get wisdom from. I don't need power. I have the power of the person. The person has enormous power to do a work in my life, and what he does in demonstrating and in working his power within me is greater than any other power that I would value in the world in comparison. All right, for those of you who are using these messages for small group discussions, I got a question for you. How have you been sent by God? All right, now if you haven't been sent by God, don't feel bad, and nobody should make anyone feel ashamed. But do you have any examples of circumstances where you have some conviction that God has sent you as his representative? Just a general question in order to initiate some discussion. And I'll continue in the next message. Thanks.